we're going to be making two masks. The reason we're using this mask over some of the other masks that are out on the market is this one with the ties will fit over an N95, and when N95s are exhausted and there are no more to be used, it will still fit over the face when it's tied behind the head. This style with the loops for behind the ear gives plenty of facial coverage. It won't fit over an N95. But it is very comfortable to wear, and it does give adequate protection for doing procedures in the in-home setting for nurses and caregivers. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut our interfacing. The reason we use interfacing is interfacing gives a moisture barrier. It's a non-woven, fusible, so that means you can iron it on. It's a non-woven, so it's not porous, and bacteria and virus need moisture to go through it, just like anything else with droplet. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take 1 yard and fold it in half, and then we will crease it on the fold line, and then we're going to take our ruler and we're going to measure 6 inches and just flip the top piece over, line up the bottom edges here so that it's nice and straight, and then put the crease in it. And then again, this time we'll line up our fold edges and the bottom edge so that we have a nice clean line, and crease it again. Then we'll flip it over, use our ruler again, and measure the 6 inches. And crease it, and then fold it back. Don't worry about it if you've got some edges that aren't quite even. These are not perfect cuts. They are approximately 1 yard cuts. They are at least 36 inches. So you will get everything you need. You will be able to get 8 masks if you cut it in this manner. So line up your folded edges, your 3 folds, because you'll notice the other side has 2 cut edges and only 2 folds. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut off 12 inches and we'll set the 12 inches aside. Then we'll take our short section, make sure all of your folds are lined up, and when you print your pattern, print 2 of these so that you can cut one out, keeping the black edge on the pattern piece, and then you place where it says place on fold of fabric. You're going to place that right on the folds. And if you don't have a rotary cutter and a ruler, then you can take a felt pen and mark around the top and put a pin in the center and then cut all the layers out at once. I find this to be an easier method for me. And you just want to cover your pattern so that you can still see the black line, but now every time you use it, you won't make your pattern smaller. So you want to be able to see that black line under your ruler. And this one has just a tiny little black line showing, so you have to be real careful to get that one covered so you don't shave it off some more. And there you now have 3 interfacings that will iron on into your mask. They look kind of big right now, but they will end up looking like this when you're done. Then we'll take the next piece, and this will need to refold so that we can get 5 pieces out of it. And if you'll notice, the top, if you put the bottom line on your you'll notice that this is 7 1/4 inches tall on your pattern. So we need to make this 7 1/4 inches tall. So there's the one, here's my 7 1/4. And we just fold it over on the ruler, and again, you're going to line up your bottom edge. And just keep doing an accordion fold back and forth, making sure that you've got your creases in place. Until you get to the end, and you should have five different folds, or 4 folds and 2 end pieces, because you've got the 2 cut edges. Now to get this so that it folds neatly in half and keeps all the centers together, we know it's 12 inches, so we're just going to fold it evenly over the ruler and slide the ruler out. That way we know that all the folds are going to be in the same place. Then we can put our pattern piece on top and do the same thing that we did before. And now we have 5 more pieces, so we got a total of 8 pieces out of that yard of interfacing. And the interfacing is called featherweight. It's a very lightweight, and we have minimal usable scraps, and that was the whole goal. Next, we need to choose some fabric, and we cut our mask pieces. Well, I think this is kind of fun. So you can use pretty much anything. It's kind of nice to throw in some guy pieces because we do have male caregivers, and we do have people that take care of children. So these are just scraps that are from my collection of fabric, because we all have collections laying around, because we loved fabric, we love to touch it, we love to feel it, we love to play with it, and we love to make beautiful things with it. So if you're not sure how much fabric you need, if you lay your piece of pattern on there on a folded piece and it covers without any problem, we are good to go. So I'm just going to line up my edges. And I've got a wrinkle here. I think I want to press that out. Okay, we have pressed both pieces so that we have nice flat pieces. You can still see where the wrinkles were, but they are nice and flat. We'll line up our folded edges and of course place our pattern right on the fold. And then you'll notice that I accidentally cut the bottom of this off. So just put your line right on right on your fold mark, and that way you'll get a nice square cut on the bottom. Make sure that you can see your line a little bit in case you accidentally cut it off like I did. And you cut it out the same way that you did your interfacing pieces. Now, if you don't have a rotary cutter and a ruler at home and a cutting mat, you can mark these with a felt pen or an ink pen or a pencil. You're just marking the outside line. And then you can take it apart and cut on the line that you've drawn with a pair of scissors, and you will have the same results. So here we have 2 different pieces. I like to do 2 different pieces so that if the nurse or caregiver or whoever is providing service to a patient has to take her mask off for any reason, she knows which is the inside and which is the outside, because there's no difference when you make them both out of the same fabric. So it's just kind of a nice thing to be able to tell in these uncertain times. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to decide which is the outside of the mask. I like this one for the outside of the mask, and so I'm going to iron on 1 piece of interfacing. Put the wrong side towards you, and your piece of facing should fit right on top. It might be a little smaller, that is quite all right. And then we're just going to press. And you just slowly move your iron over the surface until it's all adhered. I want you to see how that's adhering. In case you've never done this before, you can see that it's pretty well stuck. And as it cools, it will become a permanent part of that piece of fabric. When you do this step, before you do this step, it might be a good idea to look at whatever interfacing you have and read the directions, because every interfacing has a little bit different time that you should be pressing it. So do check the details that come with your interfacing so that you know exactly how to make it adhere to the best advantage. So the next thing we're going to do is mark our fold lines. And you can mark them either on the front or the back. And you can do an imaginary line continuing out, or you can lay it on top. And now you've got your lines right there at the edge. And we're just going to make a little mark. And we'll do the same on the other side. If you've used, if your printer prints it dark enough, you can just roll it over and you can see where those fold lines are and mark them. So if you put one finger on the fold and the second finger right on the mark and fold it down, just pull it till it lays flat and then press it. It's easier to, in this heavy interfacing, it's called featherweight interfacing, but it makes the fabric enough denser. Is that a word? Makes the fabric a little denser so that it's harder to work with. So if you do your pleats ahead of time, you're one step ahead. Okay, we have our first pleat pressed in, and for some reason I have misplaced or forgotten my hem gauge this morning. And if you don't have access to a hem gauge, then we can improvise. If you had a ruler, you can just fold this right to the 1/2 inch mark so that you can just see that 1/2 inch mark and pull it out and then press. Or you can take a piece of cardboard. This happens to be a piece of a stencil maker, and I've marked a 1/2 inch all the way across it. Now I can put it down and just put the fabric right up to that mark, hold it down, and press my pleat in. And because now we have folds, so we've got 3 thicknesses of fabric plus 3 thicknesses of the interfacing. I'm going to turn it over and press those in a little more firmly from the back side. Now we're ready for the next pleat. So I put one finger on this mark and hold it, and then we're going to put one finger on the other second mark and fold it in. And I'm going to peek underneath, make sure that I didn't lose my mark. And we are ready to press the next pleat in. Then we'll do the last one. So we'll fold it, put your finger on the mark and fold it, pressing that outside pleat. And we'll open it up and put in our last pleat. There are just 3 pleats across the front. That gives it another 1.5 inches of fullness when you wear it. So plenty of room for a nose and a mouth. So we've lined it up along the line. I'm gonna hold it, slide my template out, and I let it slip there. You see that? Because these should nest kind of right next to each other. Let me refold that. So when you let it slip somewhere, don't worry about it. Just refold it, press it again. And there we have the mask, and you can see how it's going to work when it's on. These will be sewn down so that you have a lot of give in the middle. Okay, now we are ready to sew. Okay, we're ready to sew, so we're going to take our inside and we're going to fold it in half, and the first thing we will sew is the nose dart. This makes it fit better so that your glasses don't fog if you happen to wear glasses and you're a caregiver. And we're using a 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to back stitch when we get to the center fold. So then we have this little nose dart. We'll do the same thing on the front. And now you'll understand why it's easier to put those darts in or the pleats in when it's flat, because we're going to change the shape of this. It's no longer going to be flat. And the same thing, put your pressure foot right on the edge. Make sure you've got a 1/4 inch seam. If you're not sure how to do that, take your hem gauge or a ruler or a measuring tape and put a solid edge right next to your presser foot, and then move your needle over until, because you can see the needles move, so you can move your needle over until you have a 1/4 inch seam. And because I'm going backwards on this one, I'm going to back stitch first and then go forward. You don't need to back stitch at the top because that will be caught in the next seam and you won't have to worry about it. So then we'll put our right sides together, and you press the nose seam one way on one piece and the other direction on the other piece, so those nest together nice and tight. And I'm going to pin that so that it stays right together. And you can pin or not pin however you choose. It's just a way to guarantee that you've got everything where you want it. And you don't have to stitch it again or do any ripping. Ripping is not my favorite, but I am an expert at it. And we're going to pin the corners. And then because we're going to leave an opening so we can turn this right side out, I'm going to mark it so that I don't forget and sew it all the way across. I've been known to do that. So we're just going to leave about 2 to 3 fingers of an opening so that we can turn the mask when we're ready. So we'll start. We'll stitch up to the pin, back stitch, and cut the thread, and then we'll move forward, set the needle so I can take the pin out, and we're going to do a couple stitches forward and then go backwards and finish out that seam. And then we're going to sew all the way across the top. Now remove my pin. It's never a good idea to sew over pins with an electronic machine because they are not built for taking a beating like some of the old mechanical machines, and you can bend the needle bar. So don't stitch over your pins. Make your machine last. So now we have what looks like a tube with a dart in it. And we're going to take our elastic, and this is 1/8 inch elastic, and these are 6-inch lengths. Hard to believe, I know, but that is, you can see it's 6 inches. And we're going to put one right next to the seam. We're going to have a little teeny bit poking out so that we can make sure that it stays right there. And I'm going to pin that. I want to make sure it stays right up next to that seam. And then I don't want the elastic to be twisted, so I'm going to make sure that it's doesn't have any twists in it. Tuck the loop inside. And then do the same over on the other side next to the other seam. And I'll put the fabric over the top of it. It doesn't want to cooperate. So if you have a piece of uncooperative elastic, just show it whose box. And then we'll put a pin in that one so that it stays up nice and tight next to the seam. And we're ready to sew that seam. So once you get, I like to use the hand wheel because I don't want to go, and I want to secure that elastic before I take the pin out, because once I take the pin out, elastic has a recoil on it. So I'm going to sew over the elastic, and then I'm going to back stitch, really secure that elastic, and then go forward again. And because we've got pleats in the front side, I'm going to make sure that I've got my edges matching. Sew a little bit. Make sure you stop with your needle down. and sew a little bit more, making sure your edges are nice and tight together. And now I've stitched, the needle is right down into the elastic so I can remove this last pin. And we're gonna sew down past the elastic, back over the elastic, and done. We're gonna do the same thing to the other end. So if you'd like to see that again, we're gonna tame this piece of elastic, put it in right next to the seam, and we'll pin it in place. And then we make sure that our elastic didn't get twisted. And we'll put the other end next to the other seam. And pin that one in place. I'm going to use the hand wheel again because I'm right up next to the pin and I don't want to go over it. And I'm now in the elastic, so I can pull this pin out. We'll finish going over the elastic, back stitch, and then go forward, making sure that our edges are nice and matched so that we don't have one edge sticking out farther than the other. Matching your edges all the way to the bitter end, and when we get to get to the elastic, use your hand wheel to plant the needle in the elastic. You can sew past, reverse, and you're done. Now we get to turn this, but before we turn this, we've got a lot of bulk here in the corner. We've got several layers plus the elastic. Well, we don't want to cut the elastic, so I'm going to take a little bit out of the corner right along that seam so that there's not as much bulk in the corner and we have not cut through the elastic. This just makes it a little more comfortable to wear. It does not hurt the integrity of this at all. And now we're ready to turn it. So turning is pretty easy. You reach inside, look for your elastic, because you know it's in there someplace, you just put it there. And that will help you turn your mask. And then we'll look for the elastic on the other end. There it is. Now we want to make sure that those corners are pushed out as nice square corners. So we're just going to take our scissors, and they're closed, and we're just going to work that point just a little bit so that we have a nice square corner. And I'll show you that when we get them all. We're going to do the same to every single one of them. But if your scissors are closed, you run less risk of poking a hole in the fabric. So now you can see that we have nice square corners, and we're ready to put our pleats in and top stitch. Well, if I fold this pleat like this, we're going to have big tucks in here because that seam wants to pull in. So an easy way to fix that is kind of pull it a little bit flat, and with your fingernail or a ruler or pretty much anything, you can use the end of the back of a spoon. You can just flatten that seam so it looks like it wants to lay flat. And if it wants to lay flat, then it's going to turn the corner very easily. So again, we're going to just flatten those seams all the way around because we want to have a nice, crisp, clean edge. Okay, so now the first thing I'm going to mark is the tops of all my pleats. And by the top of the pleat, I mean this is where the fabric wants to fold, because we press those folds in. So I'm just going to mark the tops. And you notice how this seam stays nice and it just wants to fold right over now that we flattened it. So we put our pins right in the top, hold it in place. And now we're just gonna fold it right on top, down, because we've got both edges marked. So when you fold it, make sure that your edges match. It's gonna wanna pull to one side so that they don't quite line up. So make sure that they're matched and that you pin them in place. You are in charge, so don't let the fabric win. So you want to make sure, again, it lines up all your layers. And the last one, you can see there's our indent. And we're just going to match our edges. And pin. Now we're going to go to the other end and do the same exact thing. So if you want to see it one more time, you can pin right through the top of that. Or if you're feeling more confident now, you can make sure that you've put your finger behind, make sure you've got all the layers of fabric and fold it down, making sure that you match the edges. Fold it right on the line, and then you can see your other line underneath and just match the edges, make those nest together. Now we're going to make sure that our opening has nice crisp, just kind of finger press that so that you have a nice even closure. And we're going to put a pin in it and make sure that it stays right where we want it when we sew it. Notice if we pin this, then the rest of it just wants to fall in place. And with the top, because we've got the dart here, we're going to put a pin up here in the center. And on the other side, because if you tame the center and the edges are anchored, see that just folds right under. It's a nice clean edge. So now we're ready to stitch. So I like to put the edge of the fabric right here on this inner edge, the metal part of my foot. That way I get close to the edge of the fabric without getting into the body too much, so that everything is anchored, but the stitches are not intrusive into the mask that's the protective part. And stitch slowly, because again, you don't want to stitch over your needle or your pins. Make sure that all those edges stay lined up. Pull your pins out as you go. And this one wanted to travel a little bit, so I'm just going to lift the presser foot and pull on that pleat a little bit so that it stays lined up. When I get to the corner, I'm going to plant my needle, lift the presser foot, and just pivot, making sure that everything is stayed lined up. To the middle, so I'm going to remove my pin. And remove the second pin. And we'll plant our needle and pivot again. For those of you that have older machines, make sure that you have a new needle in. Because we're going through several thicknesses, I would recommend a jeans needle. They will sew through just about anything and they're nice and sharp. And some of the older machines don't like to go through heavy fabric. So if you use a jeans needle and go slowly, they will sew through just about anything. The same for some of the newer machines. So now I've sewn all the way around, but I want to make sure that this lasts through several washings because there's a mask shortage right now. And even when people are done with quarantine and they finally get production going again, it's going to take a while before masks are available and protective personal equipment. So go ahead and make those seams as strong as you can and just top stitch around it twice. It doesn't matter if it's exactly on your first row of stitching, it'll be close. And some healthcare worker is going to love you because you paid attention to detail and you cared about them enough to help protect them. And we can get going on the straight stretches because they are straight stretches. This one side, and we'll cut the thread. Trim our little tails, and then this side looks pretty good. Just tuck your pleats in, and the other side we're just going to start at the bottom and tuck the pleat. And then we move to the next one up and tuck the pleat, and then the last one and tuck the pleat. And we have a finished mask. And they fold really nice and they store in a box and they're easy so that they're easy for the facility that's going to be handing them out to hand out to their staff. So that's a mask with earpieces.